All right, so we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. We'll get people logged in. And I'm just going to mute my laptop really quick. All right, for those people that are watching the Hangout live, please feel free to introduce yourself. If you're kind of watching the broadcast of it afterwards, you don't have to introduce yourself. Feel free to. And if you have questions, please leave those in the comments field. And we'll get some people logged in and we'll go ahead and get started. I see we have some questions already coming in. All right, so we have Alo from Queens. We have Charles from Edinburgh. All right, Trevor from Norfolk, England. Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for the kind wishes. All right, so we have more people getting logged in. All right, see different questions coming in. All right, so we have Vinny from Orlando, who's commenting he has beautiful weather. All right, so we have Nikos from Greece. And for those people that are watching this not live or watching the broadcast, you may want to skip ahead a few minutes as we get people logged in and some questions submitted. All right, so we have Russia, Albania, Philadelphia. We have New York. We have Mark from California, of Ohio, Colombia. We have UK. Joe Johnson says, hey. All right, we have Italy. All right, Tunisia. All right, good to see you, Taylor from Pine Grove. All right, more people from Russia, Denmark. We have Netherlands. Montrose, Pennsylvania. India again. All right, Russia. All right, we have Mission Viejo. Croatia. Turkey. Israel. All right, so we have more people logging in. So once again, if you're just logging in, if you want to just tell us where you're from. All right, we have New York. All right, so we have Miami. All right, we have Texas. We have Houston. I have a brother in Houston. We have Ireland, Korea, Oregon, London. All right, we have Candy, Netherlands. All right, South Florida, Nuremberg, Germany, Ukraine, Poland, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Australia. That's all right. It's great to see someone from Australia. I know it's probably a really weird time for Australia. All right, we have Hamburg, home to Steinberg, Las Vegas, Moreno Valley, California, Leesburg, Virginia. It's pretty close to me. I have a lot of good friends in Leesburg. All right, so we'll get more people logged in. All right, Netherlands, Riverside. All right, Norway, China, Russia, Bristol, Tel Aviv, Japan, Cape Town, Austria. All right, so some more people are getting logged in, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I appreciate everyone's patience. And again, if you're watching this offline, not live, please feel free to kind of jump ahead. Usually takes maybe 8 to 10 minutes for everyone to get logged in. All right, so we have Nepal. I think it's the first time we've had someone live from Nepal. That's cool. All right, Germany. All right, so it's always interesting to me, all the people from around the world. All right, India again. So we have Netherlands. All right, we have Fabio from Italy. All right, and if people want to start asking questions, you could leave those in the comments field. All right, we have Chicago, was just there a couple weeks ago. Romania, Netherlands. All right, and we'll just give it another minute or two, and we'll get started in Macedonia, Chino, California. All right, so we have UK. See questions about the media bay being slow. So I see a question is a new update coming up, Pro 10. So yeah, they're always working on some new functions and features and resolving some issues. All right, you'll see we have some more people logging in, so a lot of people online. It says, I noticed in Cubase 10, you can, this is a quick question, you can open more than one channel editor. There's a way to do that in 9.5. I think if you hold down the Alt button, it kind of works the same way. So you can, I think if you hold down the Alt and open up 2 different channel settings, you could do it. Okay, so good to see you, Nick. So about doing beat detective style quantization. All right. We have John from Nashville. We have Algeria. All right, we'll wait just another minute or two. Thanks for everyone's patience. And if you guys want to start feeding questions in, I know we had some people that had submitted questions before, and we'll kind of circle back and go through different questions. All right, so we have Stockholm. I think it's our first person from Sweden. All right, so we're saying a question about Absolute 4. So I think, you know, is announced for January. I think we may see it towards the end of the month. I'll probably get more information at the upcoming NAMM show. All right, so someone else from Virginia. All right, and seeing comment for integrating a solution for video capture with Cubase. I'll go ahead and pass that on. I'll be with the Cubase project managers for NAMM. All right, so we're seeing some questions come in. All right, so I see a quick question about, does Groove Agent in Cubase 10, the SE version, have a note repeat function? It does not, but you could do that with the full version of Groove Agent, but there may be some other methods that you could do. So question, will I be doing live demos at NAMM? Yes, we will be doing a bunch of demos if you're coming. And I think we may try to have some, maybe not transmit it live, but present it So we have a question, when is Aura coming before the 10.5 update? Yes, it was announced that it should be in the first quarter of this year, so look for it in the next couple months as part of the 10.x before 10.5 update. All right, so we have Denmark, Ivory Coast. Okay. All right, so we have a lot of people logged in. All right, so Moscow. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with some of the questions. So we'll kind of circle back. So, all right, so we have Switzerland. All right, so let's go ahead, and we had some people submitted questions before the Hangout started. So thanks everyone for joining us for the Hangout. So as we start off, first question, what is the Cubase equivalent of the Logic Gain stock plugin? I'm not sure what the Logic Gain stock plugin, but maybe by the name itself. If you come here on a channel strip, you could adjust the phase. You have 48.2 dB of gain or cut directly here on a particular channel, with the ability to, have high cut and low cut filters. So if you could also think of high pass, low pass filters directly here. So if you wanted to have your gain control here, it's actually just part of the mix console, and you could just simply have the gain control here. I'm not sure exactly what that plugin does. If memory serves, it might also allow you to do some panning stuff. I don't work with the program, but if I had like an audio track here, so let's say if I had it set up as a stereo audio track in this particular project, one other thing that a lot of people miss if you wanted to switch different panning schemes, as we're in the particular channel here, we could set our panner to be like a combined panner. And here, and I'll just make this perhaps in a larger view so it'd be a little more obvious. So when you look at the panning, and one trick that a lot of people don't know is that you could have different types of panners. So you could have like a stereo balance panner where you could say, I want that, anchored into the left or right channels. Or we could have a combined panner. And with this, we could just kind of, choose the amount of panning width. And if you go all the way up, you could actually just invert the panning as well. So I think, just by the name, on a channel itself, you could have gain here, and that would be, pre-fader, as well as high cut, low cut, invert to phase, and set your panning accordingly. So if I'm not that familiar with the Logic gain stock plugin, but if that isn't what it does, just feel free to let me know, Charles. All right, Charles also had a question. I find that the video window when scoring the picture puts a big strain on the Cubase session so that the video freezes. What tips do you have to minimize the impact of running the video? Video can be interesting in that the different codecs, like a WAV file that we're kind of used to working with, often will just be, a WAV file will be the same and be able to play back in any program. But video is going to be compressed and decompressed, and hence the term codec. So a lot of people, if you have it more compressed, the computer works harder, but the size of the video file is smaller. Or if it's less compressed, the video could be bigger and the computer has to do less strain decompressing it. So I just kind of looked it up on the Steinberg recommendations. And if you just kind of look under different encoding settings for Cubase in the window, generally, there are some settings for the encoding algorithm is generally, what a lot of people work with is H264. and just a couple of things that are mentioned on the Steinberg website, I have it in front of me, is the number of B frames should not be higher than 3. Anything above that will lead to unreasonably high amount of memory allocation. The number of reference frames should not be higher than 2. To keep the playback performance up, it's very important to disable weighted P frames, weighted B frames, and pyramidal B frames. It says, furthermore, if you want your video to smoothly follow when winding or using jog wheel, make sure to use a keyframe interval IDR of 1 frame, thus every frame is encoded separately. So those are some tips and tricks, and they're available on the Steinberg website if you just kind of do a search for video support in Ondo and Cubase. So probably if you just, do have a video that's encoded properly, should be able to do the trick for you. Okay, so we have a question. I have a project, and one of the tracks has a tiny lock icon on it. I can't edit or move the track. How do I take the little lock off? So you could lock the particular event or the track itself. So if I come to select the track here on the inspector, the very top parameter, there's a little lock here. And once this is turned on, that event won't be able to be altered or moved in time. So if I wanted to come over here, move it to another MIDI track, it's going to be locked in position. So you could do that on a track basis, but you could also come over here and lock individual events. So if I didn't want to lock this, or this, but I wanted to lock this event, here we could choose to lock like the position of this event, but these can be freely moved around as we see fit. So, and you have different attributes that you could lock. You could lock the position, the size, the position plus size, position plus other, so some different parameters that you could lock. So if you see a little lock on the event here, just make sure that you select it in the info line, and then you should be able to unlock it. Or if an event is seemingly locked here, make sure that we have the lock on the inspector right here disabled, and then you should be able to move the parts around freely. Okay, going to next question. All right, how can I configure a low latency record from Cubase settings? As you were working with, different low latency settings, generally this is going to be set up in the studio setup. And what we could do is when we go to the VST audio system here, we could select your audio interface and go to your control panel, and you could set the buffer accordingly. The lower the buffer means the latency will be minimized, but it can put more of a system strain on your CPU. Some audio interfaces that have onboard DSP will actually allow you to have direct monitoring on. So this way the input signal passes directly from the input to the output for monitoring purposes. And while it seems perfect, if the one drawback is if you have plugins that you wanted to monitor through, like a guitar amp or compressor on the input channels, you won't hear the effect of those. So direct recording basically passes direct monitoring basically passes the signal from the input directly to the output of the audio interface. So not all interfaces have that, and it's actually kind of often you won't see it on a Mac because it's not technically part of the core audio, but some of these Steinberg interfaces will allow you to do that. At times, you may have to set up the direct monitoring in the control panel for the audio interface. Some other things that you could do, like when working, is make sure that you have the multi-processing. So if you had the VST audio system selected, that the multi-processing is active, the ASIO guard is active. You could set the audio priority. You could adjust that as well. And as you kind of, these things can make a significant difference in performance, but a lot of it will be tied to the audio interface driver and the quality of the driver. So that coupled with a faster PC will allow you to do more. But a really easy way is to have an audio interface that will do direct monitoring as well, like the Steinberg UR series, anything from the UR242 and up. All right, so we'll move on to next question. Thanks everyone for great questions. So question from Arjun in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. Is it possible to print all the keyboard shortcuts on paper? I think within the documentation, if you go to the Steinberg help and just look at key commands, there's a number of them that are kind of printed out. I'm not sure if it's every single one, but there's probably... if you Google, there's probably just a list of, all the keyboard shortcuts, and there could be thousands of them that are available with different modifier keys. But I think within the Steinberg help that you have a number of them kind of broken down by category, all laid out for you. So you could look there and print from there. Okay, so we have a question. Why is Cubase crashing when I start my project? So often when you run into crashes like that, that could be plugin related. As Cubase has evolved over time, it's gotten to be a little more consistent with wanting higher quality plugins, and some plugins can cause system instabilities. We saw this a lot with 32-bit plugins, as well as, even a lot of, what people consider very high quality plugin companies that, would get blacklisted. So I think if you're having a crash on start, that's going to be kind of plugin related. So see if within your template you have a particular plugin that could be causing issues. But start with kind of a vanilla setting, and then you could probably isolate it to a particular plugin, and I don't run into any of that, but it's probably going to be a third-party plugin that is maybe blacklisted or was blacklisted. Next question, is there something similar to import session data of another program? I missed this function. So if you wanted to import different functions, we can now come over here and you can say import tracks from project. And while this will be a little bit different, we can now just kind of come over here and you could pick and choose which tracks, if you want it to be routed to particular tracks, if you wanted to go to new tracks. Also, what a lot of people do and have done for a long time is to, if you come here, you could say export selected tracks. And then this can be, you could copy the actual media files or the reference files. So once we've done this, we could just come here and import and we would say our track archive. So as soon as we do this, we could just see our different tracks automatically be brought in. So while it's a little different and it doesn't allow you, I know other programs will say I want to import just the sends or just the different components, but if you want to get the tracks from other projects in, just go to import and tracks from project, and you could select the particular project that you want to import the tracks from. All right, so question, any specials or discount codes you can supply? I decided to upgrade to Cubase 10 from 9.5. Been a Cubase user for 20 years, but the stuttering problem is really annoying. I don't know of any particular codes, but you could always check the website. But I don't know of any promotions going on in the update since it's so new. Throughout the year, there are, different promotions that go on. Okay, so we'll just kind of scrolling through questions. Okay, so question, since version 10, all the database stuff is slow to load, media bay, preset browsers, etc. It could be tied to a preference. So if we go to your preferences and go to media bay, you could try, allowing, the scan folders when media bay is open, only when media bay is open. If that's checked, try to uncheck that because it could, be waiting to do a scan and it could only do it while media bay is open, which could take longer. So go to your preferences to media bay, and if this is checked, try unchecking that. So, and I think that'll probably do the trick for you. Okay, just going through different comments. Okay, so I see excuse for what motive in Cubase 9.5 and 10. I lost port in and out of generic remote connected with Lemur by iPad. So if you have a device that's going to be connected via generic remote, so I'll just kind of come here and we'll just add a quick generic remote. So these will see whatever MIDI input ports are active within your system. If you don't see a particular MIDI port that, from your iPad that should be visible there, that should show you all that are available in your system. Now you may want to go to the MIDI port setup and make sure that for some reason it wasn't set to inactive or checked to be not visible. So you may want to check here, and again, this is in the studio setup. So go to your studio menu to studio setup. And at this point, you could see, all your different MIDI port setups, and then any of those that are visible should be available to be defined for the input and output. So I don't think there's any changes in Cubase 10 that would specifically change anything regarding that. So it should be the same, but make sure that, again, those ports are visible in the studio setup. Okay, reading through questions. Thanks for... All right, so just seeing a question, Cubase 9 and 9.5 projects glitch and don't load sometimes. So I know that there are some improvements with that with the maintenance update. So so check to make sure you're running the latest version, but a lot of that can kind of come down to third-party plugins misbehaving a bit. Okay, so we had a question. Can you tell us about the MIDI programming expression and continuous controller? So let's go ahead and take a quick look at some of these. Just switch my project. So go ahead and start off with doing just some of the note expression. So what note expression allows you to do is you could have different expression maps. So I could choose to look at expression maps for my violin, my cello, and these will be basically our different articulations that have been mapped for us. So when I select my cello, I could see these different articulations where the samples will switch from trills to spiccato, trills, whole tone, half tone, tremolo, pizzicato, legato, etc. Now, once these are up, and if you have a sample library like inside of, Hallion, what's really cool about this is if you go to your expression map, you could choose to just import the key switches, and that will automatically do that for you. So when I double click, we will jump over here into, let's say, our key editor, and we'll just make this a little larger so it's a little more obvious. And it used to be that when we dealt with a lot of key switching parts, that we would have low notes or different controllers that would switch between the different samples. But now, instead of looking at just the velocity for particular notes, we can look at our different articulations. So right now I have the violin 1 set to legato. But let's say for those 16th or 32nd notes, I just want those to be spiccato. So at this point, I'm just going to take off I'll undo that, and I'll say, starting at this point, I want it to be spiccato, and then go back to legato there. And what this will do is it'll switch the samples being played. So if I want to do the same thing for pizzicato, I could come here. And now we'll hear it switch to. So this allows us to get, all of our articulations managed. And when we go into our score editor, let's say if I just want to come here and we'll just make this a single staff, that it's actually going to write in those different articulations for us automatically within the score editor. So if we wanted to kind of see exactly what was going on with the score editor, we could see that as well. So that's a really easy way of kind of working with different articulations. Now, for working with MIDI CCs, often, especially composers, they deal with modulation, and we could have multiple, we will see velocities. Another type of controller we could have often is going to be, volume. And we could also have expression. So if I wanted to come directly here, we could say, okay, and we could have our expression. So we could draw in our different controllers if we wanted to see them. And we could have these controllers set up as different sources. So if we wanted to see, if we go to your CC automation setup, we could choose to have these, recorded as an automation or MIDI data as it's being kind of recorded in. So at this point, you could also do some clever editing of your controllers. So if you say, I like the controllers, but want those to be decreased or increased, you could grab the center. You could also compress or expand kind of the values. If you wanted to tilt up or down, we could grab this edge here. So it gets to be a very easy way of dealing with your different CCs and your different note expression setups. So I hope that kind of answers the question, what you're looking for, and we'll go ahead and move on. If not, just let me know in the comments field. All right, so Taylor's question about seeing kind of two different parts. I'll just jump back to my other project here very quickly. I think this works the same in 9.5 as well, and I know it's available in 9.5. All right, and we have this project loaded up. So I think if I remember correctly, that if I come here and let's select, yeah, so just holding down my Alt key would allow you to see multiple channel settings within one particular project. So just click on the E while holding down the Alt key, and then you can see multiple edit channels within one particular project. Okay, question is my speaker in the right click menu disappeared. So if we go to right click, it's probably set to, there's two different modes here. So it could be that it's set to scrub. So if you go all the way over to your play, so you should be able to choose whether a part is played or scrubbed. So if I wanted to play
musical history,
or if I wanted to choose to scrub. So you can click here and switch between the two different modes. And one trick, if you just right mouse click and you hover and tap, like in some of the tools will have multiple functions, but if you just tap, so you hover and then tap, you'll be able to switch between. So I'm going to hold down my right mouse button, tap with my left mouse button while hovering over selected tools, and then you could select different variations on those tools like that. So if you don't see that, you should see kind of, the play tool here. Doesn't look that much different, but you could just simply toggle between the two different views here with this scrub. So if I'm misunderstanding your question, just let me know in a comment. Okay, so a question says, I have a problem when trying to register a soft E licenser. A soft E licenser disappears always. One thing, it's hard to say with that information, but if you may want to make sure, sometimes you get a download access code that you may have to do in order to get the e-licenser code, but I haven't seen, like where the soft e-licenser disappears always. But, sometimes with the installation and licensing, getting in touch with support, or if you wanted to email me at giondo@yamaha.com, you could, reach out to me and I could put you in touch with the distributor, and I could put you in touch with the American distributor who could probably help you out with the soft e-licenser. Okay, so we had a question about doing kind of like quantizing of drums, like a multi-channel drums. So let's take a look at that. All right, so if we're listening to a particular project here, and let's say I have all my drums in a folder, and when we listen to our drums and we put the click track on, realize that maybe it could be a little tighter, and we often run into problems with drum fills, or maybe the drums slow down before fill. It looks like we have snare fill coming up. So the snare drum fill kind of sped up. So the one thing that you want to do to kind of quantize these drums to the grid is to put them into a folder. So you could take all of your drum tracks and then right click and move selected tracks to new folder. In this project, I have them all kind of in the folder here already. And at this point, what we want to do is I'm going to just find kind of we want to activate group. But before we do that, I want to find hit points for different drums. Now, one of the issues gets to be when quantizing drums is that you'll have, like, you know, if we look at the snare mic, we're going to hear the kick bleeding through. The hi-hats will have the snare, so overhead. So if we kind of just quantize just the snare drum, it's going to be out of time with the snare in the overhead mics. So that gets to be the trick. So what I'm going to do is to come over here, double click, and we'll select our hit points from our sample editor. And I want to adjust the threshold here so that we have the source, but not necessarily the tracks that are bleeding through. And I want to do this, let's say, for my snare. So I'm just going to adjust the threshold. So here we can see a lot of different tracks kind of okay, and we'll do the same thing for our hi-hat in this case. So we can see like our kick drum bleeding through here. So now what I want to do is to assign these to group editing, which is going to be found on the folder level. So we listen to our drums. And again, it's going to be not quite as tight as I want. So we're going to go to our quantize panel here. And we'll open up our quantize panel. What I want to do is to set different priorities. So I want to have like my kick and let's say my hi-hat, let's say my snare. We'll give 4 stars. And let's say our hi-hat will give 3 stars. So, and what we've done is basically assign different priorities. At this point, we'll say we'll quantize to our grid of 16th notes. So now that these are group edited, I can now click on the slice here. And it's going to slice all of the audio based on kind of these priorities. And as we do this, we can say, let's just quantize. And now it's going to position those slices. And as we do that, you may notice that there's going to be gaps. So at that point, we want to choose to crossfade those gaps. So as we do this, we'll listen. And you can hear how it's going to be very tight, and we'll listen to the snare fill coming up. And that's how you could kind of quantize your multi-track drums to make them fit better within your project. So again, what you want to do is to move all of them into a folder, find probably like the kick, snare, hi-hat, the most rhythmically significant parts of your drum beat, and it could vary depending upon the project. Find their hit points. apply group editing, you want to go to the quantize setup, the quantize panel, assign the priorities here within the quantize panel, set the quantize settings here, like for 16th notes, and you're going to slice, quantize, and then crossfade between them. And then your drums will be very tight. So it's a very great way to kind of like, if you have a wonderful drum track, but the drummer just sped up a little bit on one particular drum fill, you can get it very tight if needed. So, okay, let's go through some more questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Okay, so just reading a question on automation. Okay, the question is, although I use my MIDI keyboard knobs to change parameters of my VST, when I use automation system, I can only write these changes of the parameters with the mouse and not with the knobs. You may want to, if you're changing parameters remotely within, let's say, a VST instrument. So let me just quickly add. So I think I have a MIDI controller connected here. I'll just do a right click and we'll say learn CC. I'll just start over again here. Okay, so just gonna reread the question. Okay, so let's say if we have this particular automation. And let me just go beyond my project length here. And I'll just go ahead and move some automation parameters here. Okay, and so I'm just going and writing some automation here real quick. We'll zoom out. All right, so I'm just going to try hitting record. So here, when we take a look at our you can see kind of our automation showing up here. So look inside of and let's go ahead and just kind of play this back. So you see that these are all kind of moving. So make sure that when you do that, that it's not, if you just hit record, that, it could be showing up just as MIDI data as your controllers here. And this could also be contingent upon your CC automation setup, whether you want it to be written to a MIDI part or directly to an automation track. So let's say if I just put this on an automation track and I'll just play. And I'll move some of the knobs here on my controller. Then now, when I go to my automation setup here, we'll say. So now it shows up as your automation. So go to your CC automation setup, and if you want it to show up as automation, you could have it go directly to the automation track or go into the MIDI part. So if you want it to show up as automation data, and this is again found in the MIDI menu, just go to CC automation setup, and then, if you want to see it as automation, select automation and may default to MIDI part. And I think that'll do the trick for you. So question, since installing Pro 10, I found my mouse is ultra sensitive in the program. Just touching a part makes it open, or clicking on the track makes it go into edit mode. Is this a known issue? Any fix? The only mouse sensitivity issues I've heard of is kind of with the Apple Magic Mouse, and lots of programs have problems with the mouse being kind of too sensitive. So I'm not sure if there's anything, so if it's a Magic Mouse, lots of people report it in many different programs. So you may want to try just a different mouse. I haven't noticed any changes on, my Macs or PCs I've been running Cubase on. And I don't know of any changes or preferences to set that, but you may want to check directly within like the control panel for the mouse itself and see if there's any changes. Okay, going through other questions. Okay, so we had a question or a comment, add track using track preset from the little drop-down menu in the project window. The filter for star rating is missing. So let's go ahead and test it out. So I'm just going to, so it looks like we can see some of the different did see it there. Just a second, let me just try another track. So I think, I think I see maybe what you're saying, where you could just see, let me just, to filter it by number of stars it's missing. Okay, I'll pass that on. I think I understand what you're seeing, where you can't select how many to filter by the number of stars. So I'll pass that on. Thanks for the point. All right, so we kind of discussed this a little earlier. We mentioned it, but does Groove Agent in Cubase 10 have note repeat as a native function, or is it necessary to buy the Groove Agent 5 for that? The full version of Groove Agent 5 does have the note repeat. If you're not familiar with it, I'll just show you real quick kind of what you can do with it. So as you go to perform, at this point you could activate different note repeat functions so that when you hit a particular function here, let me just unmute this. So at this point, you could trigger these different MIDI notes to do different note repeats, and there's a number of different options here. So if you want to have, different steps for different note repeats, and you could trigger, different, you need to send a MIDI note. Let me see if I get the MIDI note message lined up here. But you would send the MIDI note message and then trigger this particular sound here. Let me just find the right octave on my controller. So this way, if I just kind of trigger one particular note, so now I could take these keys here, my controller keyboard, and switch the different note repeat functionality and play the note. And you could have different functions. Now, if you really wanted that functionality, obviously Groove Agent, upgrading to Groove Agent 5 is a great way to go. But one of the things you could also do, a lot of people aren't necessarily so aware of, is, the ability to do different MIDI effects. So, and if we come here, there's a MIDI echo control. So at this point, you could just say, I wanted to and you could have different, MIDI echoes here. But, for doing, the note repeat is very common, especially working in different R&B stuff. So with that, the, stock version of Groove Agent SE doesn't come with it. That's one of the things that's going to come directly with the full version of the of Groove Agent 5 with the note repeat. So there's a question, Cubase Elements 9.5, there's a bit unstable and crashes from time to time. Will there be an update there? So there was recently a update to the 9.5 generation, so you may want to check to make sure you're running the latest one, but often that can be, crashes can originate from a lot of third-party plugins, so you may want to see if, using just stock plugins is causing problems, or if that's behaving well for you, and see if you can perhaps isolate it. But I think the latest is 9.541. And generally, they will do some additional maintenance updates on previous generations as well as we move forward with later versions. Question: is there a way to set a song's musical key in the info pane? So, if a couple different things you can do. One is if we have a chord track. For a particular song. So let's say if we come here and I'll move the chord track down to within our project. Okay, so with the chord track, we could also, as we come here, you could see the root key by default. So if I come here, let's say if I put in a D, a G chord. So let's say if I just come here. Now, if we click here, you could say show scales. And at this point, you could choose the key directly, from here. So if you wanted to choose, the scales, we could do that. But let's say for a particular MIDI event, so add a MIDI track here. And it can really depend upon, the actual parts, but you can think of this as like your actual as the key there. And if you wanted to just kind of change accordingly, you could say, as you come here, you could change the root key. But if I had a MIDI part, I'll just sort of say add a quick instrument track. And let's just make sure I have and so on each part, you could have a root key set as well. So this would be more global for the project, but maybe not make other things contingent. But each part you could assign a root key to as well. And you could assign that multiply for different events if you want. So check out the chord track or by setting it independently from here. And I believe within the metadata for Media Bay that you could set the root key there as well. Okay, got just going through questions. Thanks for everyone's questions. And okay, so I see a question: is the 10.5 update free? So the latest version is 10. So so it won't be, since the version doesn't exist. So okay, so we're looking at the next question. How to export an audio and effects from another track. So I'm going to say this is maybe just a quick typo. How to export audio and effects from another track. So let's go ahead and do a new project here. Okay, so let's say if we have, and I could be misreading this question, but there's a number of different ways to export. So let's say if we have this drum loop, and if we add an effects track, and we could do this easily. We'll just add a stereo delay. And now when we play this, let's just make it like more of a slap back. So if we wanted to, export that with the different effects, so you could actually just kind of do a render in place, and we could choose to do the complete signal path. And if we wanted to, so as soon as we do that, and we could choose to, if we had just a source event, so we could just say render. And then when we just play this particular file, that would have the effects on it kind of applied. Another method to doing that, same type of thing, so the original track is muted, is using the direct offline processing. So if we wanted to come here, we have our original drum loop. We could go to your audio menu and go to direct offline processing, and you could just say, I just wanted to run a delay here, and now that will play back processed, and you could always just come over here and just choose to delete that at any time, even after saving your project, and have no problem. So if I misunderstood your question, just let me know, but those are a couple things. Okay, so I'm just seeing a comment from Charles earlier about the gain plugin. So so just the gain on the channel strip, that'll do an additional 48.2 dB gain. So, assuming a question, any updates coming for Wavelab Pro 9.5 to fix issues with the CC122, it's probably the CC121 controller not being recognized. It worked for me before I updated to 9.5. I don't have a CC121 in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I've run it downstairs in my studio without any problems. But if you want to email me afterwards at gondo@yamaha.com, I'd be happy to kind of check for you. But I haven't heard of that. So we have a question, contacted support because of the Wave Studio Rack crashing. Cubase 10.0.10 support said 10.020 maintenance update's going to fix it. I'm not sure and when is that going to be released. I haven't heard of the release date for it, but I'm sure it's being kind of tested as we speak. So I don't know the exact time frame, but I think it'll probably be pretty soon. Okay, so we have a question. I have unusually latency while playing my master keyboard. I used a bit to have an 8.5. Do you know what's wrong? Even my buffer's at 64. I play MIDI, and MIDI appears in edit very advanced in grid. So a lot of times, it could be dependent upon like your MIDI driver that you're using, especially on Windows. So if you get to your studio setup, you'd see kind of like an ignore port filter that you could try. Generally, MIDI doesn't have a lot of latency, and if you're playing virtual instruments, that latency can be determined a lot by, the buffer size that you have for your audio interface. So you could definitely try that. If you're still running into some latency issues, if you come here, you could also try the constrain delay compensation. In earlier versions, it was up top here, but you could try to activate that and see if that makes a difference for you. And that could allow you to, that might solve the problem for you, something to try. Next question. Greg, a little off topic. Do you know if Cubase will ever support multi-touch screens? I think that they're doing research on it, but I know some people like the Slate stuff works with multi-touch screens, and I know it's probably not the answer you're looking for as a control surface, but I'm sure inevitably, they're looking at it. And I don't think the multi-touch stuff really works on Mac. I could be mistaken. So sometimes if it's not equally supported, they may not spend as much, research and development until if it's not available on one platform entirely. So that could be an issue too. But I'm sure that I passed on some suggestions for multi-touch screens, and I know the response I gotten is they're looking into it. Okay, so question, can't install VST sound from additional content for Elements 10 trial. Library manager is empty. Double clicking on any sound archive causes error. The one thing is, make sure that you have, I haven't heard of a situation like this. I know people will often use the Steinberg library manager to move over. Make sure that you have, sometimes depending upon, the installation, like, I was just helping one of our sales guys with his son's computer before Christmas. And he was installing Cubase just from the Cubase installer, as opposed to the setup, which would install Cubase and the content and the plugins. So make sure when you go to run the installer that, when you'll probably have like, and this was on a Windows platform, but it could be similar on Mac as well. I'm not sure, it didn't specify which platform, but make sure that you're running the correct installer. And with the problem that I was describing is, once they had the zip file, the person, it was more of a Mac person and couldn't figure out on PC. They just needed to unzip the full file on PC before installing it, and that did the trick. But they had a very similar thing. So make sure that you take the download file and you unzip it if it's compressed, and then kind of run the full installer from there, and that will probably do the trick for you. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible copying automation from a position to another, from one track to another, using the same plugin? So let's say if I have an insert. And let's say I just wanted to insert a, you can, of course, I'll copy this and we'll make another track. So if you wanted to, copy your automation, at this point you could come here and just copy the automation like that. So it can be done. So if you wanted to go to, a different time and paste the automation within the track, you could do that. But I'm just going to reread the question. Yeah, so the question, is possible copying automation from a position, another from one track to another using the same plugin. So the same plugin could be installed, but it wouldn't. This is just kind of automation parameter, and it could be routed and copied to any parameter. So you may, it may not copy. If you copy this, it may not instantiate the plugin if that's what you're wanting to do, but the automation data itself can be easily copied and pasted to different areas. Okay, so we have a comment. When Absolute 4 comes out, I buy Groove Agent 5, but cannot use it until after Absolute 4. Yeah, so we have a lot of people kind of in the same situation waiting for the new Absolute, so to have access to Groove Agent 5. And it's maybe in relation to the note repeat functionality topic we covered a little earlier. Okay, question. Ever since upgrading to Mojave and Pro 10 version, I have ASIO driver issues. It looks like the driver does not load, and I get no sound when playing a project when switching from my Focusrite to FE inbuilt, right, to inbuilt audio and back to my Focusrite 2i2 USB, another ASIO driver. It suddenly gets activated and it's working. Obviously very annoying. Yeah, that would be annoying, but it sounds like it's, we tie directly into the core audio functionality. So when you have an issue like that, I mean, Cubase's 10 and 9.541 is all set to go with Mojave, and we do extensive testing with that. But and we always kind of caution that make sure you have the latest drivers for your audio interface, and we can't guarantee that every plugin that's running in Cubase is working in Mojave. So anytime you have an operating system update, this is always kind of some of the issues that you run into, where perhaps the audio interface driver isn't updated. So you may want to make sure that you have the latest operating system updates for your audio interface, and I think that should do the trick for you. If but when we tie directly into the core audio as part of the operating system, if the operating system isn't seeing the interface, it would probably be indicative of the audio driver that would need to be looked at. But I understand how annoying that could be. So question, are there any resources, books out there for creating Lewis scripts in Hallion? The reference guide is the absolute bare minimum. Thanks. I don't know of any. And I know that, there's not a lot of documentation on Lewis scripting in Hallion. There may be other Lewis scripting tools and kind of tutorials that are available that could be applied to it, but I don't know of any off the top of my head. Sorry about that. So I see a question. Is there anything I could do to make 9.5 projects to consistently load? Because it loads sometimes and crashes sometimes. Please help. I had someone just at a Club Cubase meeting who's, sorry about that, said he saw something online where he tried it and he mentioned that it worked for him and he was kind of shocked and was wondering if I could explain it, which I was unable to. But he saw in a thread that if he on the control room of Cubase instantiated like a Sound Toys plugin and then bypassed it and then opened a project, that every project opened up. So it's probably going to be, it might be isolated to plugins, but he was shocked that he read it and gave it a try and it worked for him. He has no idea how anyone came up with that. But it could be, you could try to maybe isolate it to plugins, but you could probably search the Cubase forums and see if you can come across any solutions or references to that. Okay, so it says, although I use my MIDI keyboard knobs to change the parameters of my VST, when I use the automation section, I can only write those changes of the parameters with the mouse and not the knobs. And again, this may be just another asking of the question we covered a bit earlier. Just go to your CC automation setup and make sure that that is set to automation track, because it's probably being written as MIDI data. If what I did earlier doesn't answer the question, I know we have kind of a lag in going through the topics. If that doesn't solve your problem, just you can reiterate your question again. All right, just reading through some comments. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay. So I'm seeing let's see, a macro to trim to start and trim to end of a clip. So let's see if we can figure this out. I may try to do this offline sometimes. I know it's kind of a function that's built into Nuendo, and we could kind of see if we could replicate it here. All right, so let's see if I split a cursor, maybe. Let's see if we could figure out the macro quickly. If not, I could do it offline and have it for next time. So see if this is for the trim. Maybe you could do something like this. And see if this is what you want, but we'll go to edit, to macros, and we'll say trim to start. I'll just try this for another minute, and then if I can't get it going, I'll work on it offline. I'm going to try to take this offline, but I think if we split, I know it's available online, and I've been asked before, and I should have worked on the macro to have it. But I think if we kind of just come here, and if you wanted to trim or basically kind of get rid of this, you should be able to. I think if we just get it selected, and it could be, I'll just try one more thing. I don't think it's going to do it, but I'll play around with it. Sorry, I don't want to waste everyone's time. But I'll make a note to have it prepared. Okay, so question about stuttering, temporary freezing on playback, and the question is, didn't have it on Cubase 8 or below. Been using UR22 latest updates on all versions. Check one thing that could cause some stuttering on playback. It could be like a defragmented hard drive. But when you go to the VST audio system, on a Windows platform here, you would see something that says use Steinberg power scheme, and make sure that is checked and give that a try, because often, especially on laptops, it could be that the processor gets throttled and almost kind of is running in more energy efficient mode, and that could cause some playback issues like you describe. Okay, so we have another question on Mojave. Are you seeing any issues with Cubase 10 on Mojave? Just asking. I've not upgraded to Mojave, but would like to be as sure as possible that there are no compatibility problems. So there are none with Cubase, but make sure that all of your third-party plugins are Mojave compatible, and your audio interfaces and all your other system components are. But Cubase is fine with that. So we have from question from Robert: is there a way to detect the key of a song in Cubase? So we could do it, I think, from MIDI parts. So I'll activate this, and I'm going to just go to, like, maybe in our project we'll have some piano based stuff. So if we come here and let's say we have our piano, what I could do, I'll just get rid of our chord track. And at this point, we could select that and go to project. I think it's going to be under, and let's say if we go to our chord track, we'll create our chord symbols. And here it's automatically determined the key based on the piano part. So if we wanted to look at this, we can now look at it in the key of G like that. So for MIDI stuff, you can select the event and under project, go to your chord track, create chord symbols, and then it could determine the chords from the piano part. And with that, determine the key, and you may not see the key unless you click here to enable that. And if you wanted to see these chords within the score editor, we can now just kind of, if you go to your scores to advanced layout, we could just say show chord track, and now all the chords will be laid out for you within your score editor. All right, so we had in our comment, maybe like an addendum comment. Says, by the way, the stuttering on playback happens only using Cubase, VST's instrument. So depending on the instrument, it could, if it's sample based, if it's going to be loading up samples, you may want to, make sure that, you have enough RAM to load up the samples, and, because parts of it will be streaming off your hard disk. But again, check the power scheme and make sure that is set accordingly. Okay, says, Dear Greg, in modifying MIDI, I long for applying velocity presets for hi-hats and string lines. Logical editor is so limited. Any ideas, please? You could do quite a bit with the logical editor, but let's say if I wanted to, we'll do a new project. I'll show you another trick that you could do. Okay, so let's do the most generic drum pattern of all time here. Okay, so let's say if I just had a whole series of all right, and let's say I wanted like my hi-hat pattern here. And let's say if I wanted this as my quick pattern here, so I'll just so let's say if I want this as my velocity pattern, where maybe not our hi-hats are kind of different velocities. So one of the tricks that you could do is if we go to kind of your quantize presets, at this point you could set the okay, let me just okay, so I'm going to take not my audio alignment panel, but my quantize presets here, my quantize panel, and I'm going to drag this over. And what we want to do is to have velocity as 100% and position at 0%. Then we could save this just as a velocity pattern. So if I come to another part, let's say if I make a copy and this part I have all of the same velocities, I can now just choose this and quantize, and it's not going to adjust the position, but what it can do is just quantize based on the velocity only. So that's something that you can try. Now, there's other cool things that you could do within the logical editor that aren't as obvious. So if I wanted to just select a particular logical editor, you could do different counts. So let's say if you wanted to take value 2 of the notes, and if we come here, once you start getting into let's say value 2, and then you could say, and there are some different YouTube videos I've done on this, but you could just say to let's just see if I can, maybe it's under value 2, but you could set like an event counter. And what the event counter can allow you to do is to, let me just see if I could. It's just. So I think it's under maybe, so if you choose your velocity here, so let's say value 2 of a note, and you say, velocity is equal, or we could say inside range, sometimes helps. So say 0 to 127, and then you could say event last event. And you could do like, every other event like that. So you can say, oh, so here you can see the event counter. So you can say like every other third note, every other third note you could increase the value to and add, 47 to the velocity. But try playing around with the, saving quantize or velocity presets by dragging these over here and setting the position to 0% and velocity to 100%. I think you'll have a collection of different velocity quantize presets. All right, so we had a question. Is there a way to exporting selected MIDI files only from a project? Is this exporting, if we go to export a MIDI file, think if we do if you're doing a MIDI file, we'll do a quick test here. So I'll take this and we'll duplicate tracks and so if the MIDI tracks are muted from the original one, that won't be copied in the export MIDI file, it looks like. And if you wanted to take, a number, so that's with MIDI files. I'm not sure if that's what the intention is, but if you wanted to take a number of MIDI files and export them as audio simultaneously, you could do it through a render in place or do it through the export audio mixdown. So, but if it's for a standard MIDI file, try just to mute it, and I think that would exclude it from the standard MIDI file. Okay, so question, if I'm using several projects file versions within a project and I'm deleting events in the latest version, will only the files for the latest version stay if I choose to remove unused files in the pool? So let me just think about this for a second. So using several project file versions within the project, deleting events in the latest version. So the files will stay if you choose remove unused files in the pool. But if you delete them if it's in the pool will be referenced for the particular files here. So let me just jump back and copy a couple of loops over into here. Okay, so now if I come over here to the pool window, and if I delete these particular files, Yeah, they'll still be there, but unless we go to the pool and physically, uh, you know, so removing the unused media won't delete it off of the hard drive. But if we deleted that and moved it into the trash, then the files could be deleted from the previous file. So I think you're fine. Removing the files won't affect the other ones, but if you actually moved them to the trash and emptied the trash, at that point it would. Okay, so we have a question. After track import, will I lay the imported track on the same track or puts it in different tracks? I think this might be from the import tracks from project, maybe referring to that. So if I wanted to do this, you have the destination where you could have it go to a new track, or to, if you have the same track on the same project, that you could replace it. There's also options if we come to import audio files, and we see a lot of different audio files. Just say if I come here and I look at my audio files and we want to import these, that you have the choice to import onto one track or to different tracks. So, but I think it may be referring back to our previous question. So we have a question why Cubase 8 has better dynamics than Cubase 10. I'm not sure if I understand the question. The plugins have been slightly modified, some of the dynamics plugins, but there's, with Cubase 10, there's also from version 8 a 64-bit floating point engine. So, but there's like dynamic range isn't affected if you're using kind of the same settings, and most people found the new options in the dynamics plugins to be incredibly beneficial. So we had a quick question. It was answered, what Cubase version is this? And I'm running Cubase 10 Pro. All right, so we had a question, why does Cubase only allow 8 inserts and 8 sends? So you have 8 sends, but since version 9.5 in Cubase Pro, you can have up to 16 different inserts. So most people, we had a lot of people complained about the limitation of 8 inserts, so we gave them 16. We haven't had many complaints on 8 send effects, because you can have 8 sends simultaneously, but if I go to a send here, so let's say if I wanted to go to add an effects channel, let's say if I wanted to add my delay, at this point, we could go to our effects return channel, and within the effects return channel, you could stack up to 16 plugins. So you could have, 128 different plugins via sends. So not sure if it's a real limitation. So you could have 128 plugins via sends at once. 8 distinct sends going out to 16 plugins each. So, but since 9.5, which is 14, 15 months ago, you had the ability in the Pro version to, I think the artist version, not absolutely sure off the top of my head, but you do have the ability of 16 inserts and 8 sends. All right, so we have a question, how to set up proper disk usage average. It's overloaded. So, a lot of time for straight audio uses, you may not have to do a lot of tweaking with disks. You could go to your studio setup and go to the VST audio system and adjust your disk preload time. If you're doing a lot of sample-based material, you may want to, go into a particular plugin, like you can see this on Groove Agent or in Halion, where once you go to options, you could set how much is set to be preloaded. And so some of the virtual instruments, like samplers that are streaming samples off of the disc, you may have to increase that to get more samples. But, on my, 4 or now 5-year-old laptop, my PC laptop, I could do 100 plus tracks at 24-bit, 48K audio playback with nothing really hitting it that hard, and I could still do more. So you may want, if you're doing virtual instruments that are streaming from disk, try, giving them more RAM. So, all right. So we had a question, how to right click with function. So this is one of the things that has changed in 10. So you have kind of your mouse capability with your tools when you right click, or if you right click while holding down like Alt, you'll get kind of context sensitive functionalities. And this is one of the design changes in 10, where to make it a little more user friendly to a first time user, where you don't right click and have 14,000 choices. That was a little intimidating for a lot of people. I've lobbied, and I'm still continuing to lobby, to try to get more of an integrated context sensitive functions and tools combined, but at this point it's separated. So I'm saying just more points to our discussion forums as we're the question about version 8 and 10 with dynamic range, as I compared versions 8 times 10, and they all have the same settings. It turns out that the version 10 is the game worse. Why is this so? So I don't think you're going to actually, if it's something with that, I don't think it's going to be Cubase related. So I think there's going to be a change in something else. Maybe there's a 32-bit plugin that isn't being seen in Cubase 10 that you had in Cubase 8. So okay, so just reading through some comments here. Okay, how to use an audio track only for reference when it is not possible to detect. Okay, so I'm just reading this. So how to use an audio track only for reference when it is not possible to detect the tempo track sufficiently correct. Should I slice the reference track and finally smooth out the tempo? If you have an audio file, so if this is for tempo reference, let me see. I think I may have a file here to work with. Just see, I have a file that YouTube won't freak out over. Okay, so if we want to do, and I think the question is kind of dealing more with tempo references. So, and if the tempo isn't done correctly, so say I'll take this file here and let's do a quick tempo detection from the project. And we'll have it do its analysis here. Now, as it does the tempo detection, you know, what it's going to leave you in with the time warp tool selected. So if I want to come here, so say I'll just do offbeat correction. So if you find that maybe, you know, and I've seen an occasional project where, you know, something, so leave this window open. And if you find that you have to kind of tweak a particular area, what you could do at this point is just say, okay, I need to tweak, you know, this particular measure. At this point, what you do is now adjust the beat that's off, just adjust it, like let's say to the transient here. Then it's going to do an analysis of everything after that point, and you could adjust. So since the time warp tool is selected, go directly underneath the measure and adjust the tempos manually. And then as it does that, it just recalculates the tempos from that particular point onward so that you have a sense. But, you know, for the most part, the tempo detection works, you know, way better than it should. But it's, you know, it's not immune to, like, you know, like I was working with someone who had, you know, one drum fill in his disco tune was, you know, throwing off the whole thing. But at that point, you know, it will leave the tempo detection window open and adjust manually, you know, and you can see just go directly below the timeline. It may make sense to move the track that you're analyzing directly to the top and then just adjust accordingly here manually, and you could set up little tweaks for that. If I've completely misunderstood your question, just let me know. Okay, so I'm just seeing questions. Says my e-licenser stopped working and shows error DCOM. Unspecified. I've also reinstalled, etc., and was able to perform maintenance. Also download latest version, etc. So one of the things to check is to make sure, like, you know, if the e-licenser has died, which is very rare, but I've heard of it happening like once, that, you know, as you insert it, see if the light turns on. And if the light turns on at that point, you know that the e-licenser is kind of alive. Try it on a different computer and just see if it's being recognized directly there. I was just helping Alan Parsons, kind of the noted producer engineer, and he had a similar thing where his e-licenser was stopped working, but it was running through an unpowered USB hub with like a 13-foot cable or something like that. And when he connected the e-licenser directly to the computer, that it was fine. So try, if you have the option, to connect it to a different computer to see if it lights up and is recognized. It doesn't have to be where your Cubase is installed, anything with a USB driver for Mac or PC. So try that. And if not, you know, you can contact the Steinberg support and you could initiate, you know, getting your, you know, licenses restored for, you know, they often are able to do that so that your licenses can be restored on a new e-licenser. Question: is it possible to change the Hallian Sonic SE as default instrument with another instrument? For example, Hallian Sonic. And this is probably dealing with MIDI files, I assume. So one of the preferences, so there isn't a way to do that like for MIDI files. But as we want to look here, and one of the things that people get this question when they import a MIDI file, that it automatically goes and is routed to Hallian Sonic SE multi-timbral, and they may not want that. They may just want to have the MIDI file. So there's just a preference here under preferences, MIDI file. So you can kind of check that, but it won't automatically do it to Hallian Sonic. But if it's another kind of default instrument, a way of working, just let me know in the questions, Fabio. Okay, so question why eLicenser doesn't show the Groove Agent 4 and 5 that you installed, that you bought. So generally the eLicenser will always indicate the licenses that are on it. It may not show Groove Agent 4 if Groove Agent 5 is on, because Groove Agent 5 can run the Groove Agent 4 version. So you may not see that, but make sure that, and sometimes depending on, making sure you have the latest eLicenser installed, and, can make a difference with that as well. But you may not see Groove Agent 4 and 5 on the same dongle, because the Groove Agent 5 license, if you updated your Groove Agent 4 to 5, at that point the Groove Agent 5 license runs the previous versions. All right, so okay, so we have a question: can groups of MIDI notes be sliced at once for things like hi-hat rolls? So I'll show you just a little trick. It's a great film composer trick. Oh, hang on one second. Show it in our... Get my Cubase up in here. Sorry about that. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so if you want to do like quick hi-hat rolls on a particular note, let's say if I have a note, just bypass this real quick. Sorry about that. And let's say my note is this long, and if I want it to come here, what you could do is with the scissors tool, if you hold down the Alt key, you can now split. So if you have one long note, just the interval that you cut. So if I wanted to cut this at every beat, it'll now automatically split the notes. So just grab the scissors tool, or if I want it to be on 16th notes, grab this scissors tool, and with the Alt Option key selected here, just boom. And then that will automatically split, and you could, do quick rolls like that, or just a lot of film composers use this just to take one note and, those types of parts very easily. All right. All right. Thanks, everyone, for wonderful questions. Okay, so question is, I've been doing a recent track and the artist took many takes to get the vocals done. Is there a way to render all vocals down into one WAV file and import it back into the project? Okay, so yeah, there's a number of ways of doing this. So okay, so I'll just get a file. So let's say if I had a vocal that was cut up in numerous ways, it was kind of comped together from many different takes. And I know this is just one file here, but I did something very similar. So we have all these different takes here, and these are, let's say, different audio files from different takes that were all comped together very easily. You want to take this and turn it into one contiguous part. So if we select, one way to do it is there's a couple different approaches. One is to select it all and go to audio and just choose to bounce selection. And then you have the option to replace events. And then you have one contiguous vocal file. You could also, if you have just the track selected at this point, you could go to, let's say if we go directly to our render in place functionality, you go to your render settings, and here you could just say, I just want to take that, and at this point we'll say I wanted to, mute the source tracks or remove the source tracks at this point, or disable the source tracks. You have different options where you could just say, and one of the options that you should uncheck when you do that is, I could show by error. When you go to the render in place, is you could do this as one event at the top, at the mode. So if I wanted to replace it and put it onto the same track, I could just remove the source tracks and just say render, and it's going to place it directly below. It's going to make one contiguous audio file and then automatically replace the existing one on the same track, just like that. So those are a couple of different approaches for that. Okay, so we had a question about the expression maps are created by the user. Sometimes it can be part of the sound library. For example, I'm evaluating Iconica, and I cannot find their already edited expression maps. Okay, so with Iconica, let's say we'll just show this here. And this is one of the beautiful things of Iconica. Sorry about that. Sometimes one of the cool things with Iconica is the ability of doing all of your expressions in kind of a very dynamic way. So I'll just load up a Violin 1 standard patch. And when running it inside of a host application like Halion or Halion Sonic SE that you can run it with, you get some, really great options with this. So we'll go ahead and show you. Now, this is one of the things that you can do that makes kind of the articulations very interesting. So if I come here with Iconica, we'll go ahead and open up, and we'll go to our macro view for Iconica. I could see these different articulations. And at this point, when I go to my note expression, or to my expression map rather, I just say import key switches. And this has automatically extracted the key switches directly from the instrument. So with the Halion, that's automatically done for you, so you don't have to make your own. Now, if I chose to add different articulations and key switches, and now all I had to do again is say import key switches, and those have been added as well. So as we do this, we don't have to create our own key switches, because anytime we do this, it's going to be automatically done. So if I wanted to get rid of my key switches, I'll say import key switches, and we'll see that that's dynamically related as soon as we just go to the expression map to import key switches. So being able to deal with those articulations and manage them exactly how you want is one of the great advantages of the integration with Iconica Library and Halion with Cubase. So I hope that makes sense, and if you have questions, just let me know. All right, so we had a question about right-click options not showing with right-click in pool. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so let's drag these in. We have our pool window here. So looks like everything is showing up with a right click for me, but I'm just going to reread the question. And saying advanced options not showing up in the pool. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding your question, but I think it seems like it's functioning for me. Okay, so a question: when will mixer snapshots be able to be automated or synced to a track like the arranger track? It's a little tricky because a lot of, if we say you wanted to sync your it can be tricky because there's a lot of stuff outside your control with mixer snapshots. If you're loading up huge convolution reverbs and convolution impulses within guitar amp plugins, those may take a lot of time, and Cubase can't measure how long each impulse or sample can take to load within a snapshot. So it could be tricky. So, it's hard to guarantee that it'll function exactly, in time with a Ranger track, because depending on as stuff is playing, we don't know if it's going to load up in time. So, and the second part of the question is there a way to change a song's musical key directly in the info line? If you have a project, you can't necessarily change it from major to minor. Like for an existing project, so say if we're playing back, And let me just set this up so you guys could hear. Now you can kind of set a root key and then transpose. So you can, transpose like that, but it's not necessarily going to be, like D minor to D major, stuff like that. But you can transpose up or down in semitones. Okay, going on to next questions. Okay, are there ways to batch export vocal up, down, instrumental, wave, AIF, MP3? Is there a tutorial available? So currently there isn't a way to kind of batch export files like that. Trying to think if there's... I know Wavelab has the option to do like a multi-export, so you could say, you could do like there's nothing that's like a vocal up, vocal down automated export. I see where that could be handy. But when you could do like when we do your export audio mix down, if you want to do different file formats, you could choose to, like when you do your audio mix down, do your post process. And in the post process here, you could say that you wanted to be exported to Wavelab instead. So right here on after export, we could say open into Wavelab 9.5, and then from Wavelab export, do a multi-export to 32-bit, 64-bit float, 192, 32-bit, 192, 2448, 2496, MP3, AAC. So, but no way within Cubase to really do that. But I'll pass that on as a suggestion. So question, I have problems with my media bay is really slow with plugins. Is there a way to remove plugins and instruments? So if you go over to your media bay settings, at this point, if you go to the little settings cogwheel, you may see, I think it's like the... if you don't see like, your different folders here, if you go to like factory content, you could choose like your VST3 presets. And at this point, you could uncheck which plugins you don't want it to look into if you find it slow. And again, if it's slow, sometimes making sure that you do that preference we mentioned earlier. Under media bay, I haven't noticed it be slower, but make sure, if this is checked, try to uncheck that. But you can pick and choose exactly which folders media bay will choose to not look into and basically ignore. All right, so just a comment on compressing controller data. Haven't seen it before. Thank you so much for showing it. All right, yeah, there's lots of great stuff like that. Okay, just reading through a couple comments. right, so I think, Frank, I see you asked your question again about the 10.0.2. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but I could try to get some answers if you want to contact me later. Okay, so we had a question, maybe I need a beginner video. What's quantize mean? So what quantizing will allow you to do is, and it kind of started with a lot of MIDI stuff. And if we find that the notes are like ahead or behind the beat, and it kind of started with its origins in MIDI. So let's say if I wanted to look at particular notes here. So if particular notes were ahead of the beat or behind the beat, often what could happen is, you know, like here we could see these notes come in slightly before measure 17. But if I wanted to, I could just say quantize, and then we could move the note value directly to a particular rhythmic value. So I could say I wanted to quantize it or move these notes, the start of these notes, to the nearest quarter note. And you could just do that by hitting the letter Q for quantize, and that will allow you to, you know, see, you know, your different notes here and have those kind of be rhythmically in time. So quantize is kind of like a rhythmic spell check, if you will, as if we're to make an analogy to word processors. So, all right. So again, we had another question on when Absolute 4 is being released. So there's probably a big trade show coming up in January in Anaheim. So that may be a good time to kind of look back. So, but I think we'll see it in January is when it's been announced. Okay, so question is, lately I've been a problem to open Cubase 10 and Wavelab 9.5 one after another. Also, if I try to do that and my e-licenser is empty and have to restart my PC to be able to use Cubase or Wavelab. So, you know, it'd be, if you're running your e-licenser on a hub, see if you could get a powered hub, or if you could simply connect it directly to a USB port, or if it's connected directly to a USB port, some of them can have different levels of power. Make sure that you have, you know, like, you know, you could try another available USB port. You could also try to download the latest e-licenser software, and that, you know, one of those things will probably do the trick for you. So, all right, so going on to the next question. It says, hi Greg, I recently bought Groove Agent 5 but had to put the data on another hard drive in my system. How do I make sure that all the new stuff is correctly installed? So I think if you go to, let me just take a look here to see if I have it, but there's a program called the Steinberg Library Manager, and all you'd have to do is come here to your Groove Agent, and at this point you could just choose all the different files and choose to move them, and this will kind of keep track of all the data paths inside of Cubase. So so just make sure. And then, you know, so that's an easy way of doing it. And then, you know, if it's not correctly installed, you wouldn't see the kits available, like when you go to start Cubase. So as we come here, so, or as you go to the plugin itself, so say if we go to, you know, your Groove Agent SE, and you can see it in the media bay. All these different kits will be available to play within your Groove Agent. So at that point, you should be all set. But, you know, using the library manager is a great tool to migrate and move all the samples to another drive. All right, question. Are we going to see the export to video function in Cubase again? Yes, we will. I think we may see. We'll see it in the future. I'm not sure when. I know it's being kind of worked on as we speak. So I know it's later than a lot of people want. I realize that, but it will happen. All right, so we had a question. What's the best way to assemble a take of number of different track versions? So let's go ahead and do a quick. Okay, so we'll just do some fake recordings here. And let me just. Okay, and then I'll just come over here and we'll just say, okay, let's just do new version of this. And you could also just kind of come directly here as a new version. Okay, so now that you're here, you know, if you wanted to, so I'm just going to reread the question. So the best way to assemble a take out of several different versions. So if we come here, you know, we could cut, and we don't necessarily have to cut each of them, but I could say this will be version 1. And, you know, one easy way that I like to do, especially if I'm kind of comping, is to convert like track versions. And it, you know, this could, you know, for like an individual part, I like to do, you know, versions to lanes. And now I could just grab the comp tool here, and, you know, as I just wanted to, you know, comp different parts, you could do that. So if you didn't want to do that, but you could also just kind of, you know, assemble your different versions and switch between different versions there as well. So, you know, and you could say, I want this from version 3 and I want that from version 2. So you could allocate different parts of track versions for how you want. But okay, so we have a question on colorizing tracks not working. So we get this a lot. Let me just switch this all to. Okay, so the colorized tracks, you know, seems to work fine for me. So if you know, if you want to colorize an individual track, but you could also hit, I think it's Option Shift C or Command Shift C. Or let me just, you know, if you come here, you have the color palette. Let me just get the right keyboard shortcut. You could also just come here and make sure the color menu is turned on. But here you could just select kind of your different colors. Let me just jump here to my mix console. And let me just... maybe it's not working for me now, so. But usually it's just kind of accessing. It doesn't seem to be working for me either, but I'll pass that on. But usually you could kind of select the colors here and be able to have the color drop down open. Let me just try another project just out of curiosity. Oh, I'm sorry. It was working. I was just looking in the wrong area. All right, so if I come here, all right, so it's Alt-Shift-C will open up your color panel. And we could also just open it up directly from here. So if you hit Alt-Shift-C, here I could take like my selected events here and change them all red. I could take the events here if I wanted these all to be yellow. If I don't have any of the events selected, I could just come here, make those, change the colors for the selected tracks to selected events. So just hit Alt-Shift-C or Option-Shift-C if you're on Mac. And at this point, you could set up new colors. So it used to be that, you could still kind of click here to select different colors. If you come here, you could also just, use your mouse scroll wheel to change to different colors, but the colors still work fine. All right, so a question from Jeffrey Mitchell. Hey, what's up? How many sessions are you giving at NAMM in California this month, on what topic? So we'll be doing a number of different topics. So I think we're doing sessions on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Sunday will be kind of open, but we'll be doing Cubase, Dorico, we'll be doing Nuendo, as well as virtual instruments. So, and we'll have a schedule posted soon, and we may have some artist stuff as well. So, but there'll be people in the booth, and it'll be in the Elite Ballroom, kind of next to the Yamaha booth in the Marriott. So we'll be there. So please come on out and say hi. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, is the hardware option in the mix console been removed in C10? I cannot see it anymore. No, it's still there. Let's go ahead and take a look for it. So, and this is probably if you have a Yamaha or the Steinberg branded audio interfaces or made by Yamaha. And what you want to do is to make sure, that when you go to your audio connections, that you have an input that is assigned to one of the inputs from your device. And then you see the hardware show up here. And we could see kind of the available, what racks are going to be visible, directly here. So if you go to your racks, you could see that hardware. Make sure that that is checked from the rack settings. And then you should see the hardware settings where you could access like the onboard reverb, as well as the morphing channel strip directly here inside of Cubase 10. So make sure that the racks are set up and that you have in the audio connections an actual input connect defined routed to the Steinberg interface, because do that, if that's not connected, you can see that that will disappear. So but it should show up fine for you. All right, so question, will Cubase Pro 10 support the Houston control surface? Yep, it's still kind of a staple in a lot of people's studios. So to get that set up, just get your audio hardware set up, and then you could just see your Steinberg Houston. I don't think it works with the USB drivers, but it still has MIDI ports, which work fine. So again, just go to your studio setup, and then you could define your Houston and what MIDI input and output port that it's connected to, and then you should be all set up. So yeah, it's still a great controller that a lot of people use after all these years. You know, it's been 18, 19 years that it's been out. So yeah, still support it. Okay, so differences between like the loop browser and sound browser. So we could think of, you know, these are really just kind of scaled down versions of kind of the same thing. So very similar in concept, but, you know, these are kind of, you know, so you can see that the loop browser is going to be more for audio files, MIDI loops, and patterns, and these will be for more track and plug-in presets. So if you're looking for different loops, tend to go to loop browser. If you're looking for presets for, you know, track presets or plug-in presets, the sound browser is more for like instrument presets, and you think of loops as kind of defaults to, you know, actual, you know, we'll do more loops and MIDI loops and patterns. But functionally, they're very similar, and it's just a subset of features from the full version of Media Bay. Okay, question. Any tips for beat making in Cubase coming from Machine? A lot of people, you know, don't utilize, you know, one of the tools that's available to them, and that's going to be like the, you know, the Cubase drum editor is phenomenal for programming beats as is, but a lot of people miss the capabilities that you get with Beat Agent. So let's say I'll just load up a quick kit here. So one of the MIDI inserts that you can do is just one called Beat Designer, rather. So I'll just come right over here. And at this point, you could just say, I want to take this. We'll create our drum maps from our instruments. And now as we go to our MIDI inserts, we could set how many steps it is. And if you wanted to adjust velocity, add flams if you click on the bottom, these could be resized. Probably the worst beat of all time. You could also add different swings. Mute solo. You could do stuff like, okay, I want to, you know, shift this all to the right, or shift to left, or reverse the pattern. And then if you want to, you could actually just insert the pattern at the cursor and have that directly inside of your project if you want to. So you could say copy the pattern, come here, paste, and have that. So, you know, that's a really great tool for kind of programming beats that a lot of people kind of underutilize, and you could trigger different, you could have, you know, multiple patterns that could be triggered via MIDI as well. So you could have, that's, you know, it could be just one pattern of, you know, 48 patterns that you could have going on. So play around with, and again, just go to like a MIDI insert and select a beat designer, and you should be all set with that. So play around with that, and that'll kind of, if you're coming from a machine, it may make a lot of sense for kind of programming different beats like that. All right, so a question, is it possible to convert a chord track to a MIDI track? So let's say if I all right, so let's say if I have some chord tracks here. So if you wanted to now convert this into a MIDI track, just drag and drop, and it will now make the MIDI parts directly from the chords for you. You're just going through some questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Okay, we have just a lot of questions going through different options here, so just reading through. All right, so we have, is it possible, okay, so question, I can't play chord pads from a MIDI keyboard. So one of the things to make sure is, you know, as you do this, you could just trigger your different chords. Let's say if I load up a quick instrument track here. So make sure that you're kind of in the right octave. You can see now here I'm going to go down an octave, and now I'll be able to. So I'm just playing one note that's triggering the chords. Something that's kind of, make sure that the track is record enabled, and also it could be that, you know, you could make sure that this is turned on because the chord output, because you could just have the chord track add the chord pads as a MIDI input. So leave that in the default mode, and you should be able to play it from MIDI. All All right, so how to export Cubase Pro 10 MP3 to 320. So let's say if I wanted to take this, we go to our export audio mixdown. And then you just come over here to the attributes and you could select it to 320 and put in your MP3 tag information as well. So make sure you have your file type set to MPEG-1 layer 3 and go to your codec settings. And then you could adjust it to 320. So you see a question about what about wrong hit point detection in Cubase 10. So if you do have something that does seem wrong, you can manually change the hit points as well. So okay, so a question about recording MIDI data from Flex Fraser. So how it kind of works inside of Hallion with the Flex Fraser. Doesn't necessarily record it back in, but if I come here, we'll just do a little bit of. But basically, you could record the Flex Fraser information. Let me just. So at this point, you could record it, as you just hit record here. And then you could just drag. So if I come here and then just record, and then you could drag it directly to, from here, you could record directly to here, and then drag those from Hallion directly onto your project. So you see a question, have we covered VST Connect Pro? It's really hard to show VST Connect Pro in an online hangout, just kind of the logistics of it. So we haven't covered that. So this is probably maybe from Linux. So question, when installing a new version of Cubase, do I need to uninstall previous versions? I want to update 8.5 to 10. You don't have to uninstall. A lot of people will choose to keep it for compatibility, and if you have 32-bit plugins in your 8.5, etc. So there's no need to uninstall. You can if you want. All right. Question, can MIDI data be converted to automation? So if you have like MIDI controllers, you can, so let's say if I come here and I have a MIDI part inside. So that's what you have to do. So go to your MIDI menu, to functions, and then we'll go to extract MIDI automation, and then I will turn it into automation data. All right, so question, how do you configure it so the knobs on your MIDI keyboard control VST plugins? It can really be up to the VST plugin of what it's doing. So a lot of plugins will allow you to right-click and learn MIDI CC and move a knob, and it's controlling it. If not, we could assign these to quick controls. So we could say, let's add this to this particular quick control slots, and we could see your quick controls here, and we could have these accessed by doing our studio setup, and then we'll see our VST, quick controls, and then you could learn these settings so you could have your 8 knobs in your controller control your quick controls. So that's probably an easier, more streamlined approach to work on it in quick controls. So question, I still use Cubase 9. Is it free updating to Cubase 10? Is it worth it? It's definitely worth it, but it's not free. So, there's a lot of great new features that you have. So that might be, it's definitely worth the investment for the features, but it's not going to be free. We had a lot of people work really hard to give you new functionality. Okay, using Artist 8.5 and upgraded to Mojave. Now Contact 5 VST doesn't load MIDI on project previously saved. Should I upgrade to Artist 10 to fix the issue? I'm not sure if, depending, for compatibility with Mojave, you're going to need at least 9.541 for it to officially be working. But a lot of it, could be that maybe you might have to upgrade your contacts. I'm not sure if it sounds more like a contact issue to me. But officially 9.541 and higher, including 10, will be set up for Mojave and designed for it. Okay, so question, how can I deselect within a take event, not project? Say I have selected a portion of a take using range tool and I want to select something outside the region instead. So let me see. All right, sorry about that. All right. So let's say I grab my range selection tool. Say I've selected a portion of my take using range tool and I want it selected outside of the region selected. Could be, there's a couple of different range editing options. One of these could